Hey friends, this novel is truly a treasure I've discovered recently. The female-led, originally an ordinary underling, becomes the monarch's mate in a rather absurd way. This is full of dramatic irony. What's more, there's the creepy advisor 𝐊𝐢𝐬𝐬, who's eyeing the female-led. The monarch, despite his power, is caught in a dilemma trying to protect her. These contradictions and contrasts intertwine into an irresistible story. Today, we'll take you deep into the novel's wonderful aspects. Chapter 20, My Star. Those two words haunted me for the next 2 days, their meaning elusive and unsettling. Was it a term of endearment for a past lover? Had the king been calling out for her in his moment of vulnerability? The thought sent a sharp pang through my chest, but something about it felt off. Instinctively, I knew this was about a former flame. As I sat on my now bare mattress, the king's letter clutched tightly in my trembling hands. I watched the servants sufficiently pack away my few possessions. The weight of uncertainty pressed down on me, threatening to overwhelm my already fragile emotional state. It was then that 𝐊𝐢𝐬𝐬, with his casual demeanor and protective nature, appeared at the doorway to offer some clarity. "Why do you look so troubled, my lady?" he inquired, his warm brown eyes filled with curiosity as he leaned against the doorframe. Muscular arms crossed over his chest, the king was still in his chambers, sleeping late as usual, though I hadn't expected to see much of him anyway. Gathering my courage, I asked the question that had been gnawing at me. Who is Immerse? The change in 𝐊𝐢𝐬𝐬's demeanor was immediate and alarming. His body tensed, and a flash of unease crossed his usually cheerful face. "It would be wise to forget that name," he advised, his tone uncharacteristically serious. His cryptic response only fueled my curiosity. Why was so terrible about it? I pressed, my insecurity momentarily forgotten in the face of this mystery. 𝐊𝐢𝐬𝐬 hesitated, his gaze briefly darting away before meeting mine again. Names possess power, some more than others. Frustration bubbled up within me at his 𝐊𝐢𝐳𝐬𝐧 before I could voice my dissatisfaction. He continued, "It's an ancient name, belonging to one of immense strength. The king invokes it when he requires that power, but it should only be uttered by him. It's best not to speak it again." His explanation left me with a whirlwind of new questions, but the finality in his expression told me he wouldn't elaborate further. The concept of a name's summoning power was both fascinating and terrifying. "Come, my lady," 𝐊𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐬 said, his familiar easy smile returning. "This room will be empty soon, and you must be famished." Though hunger was the furthest thing from my mind, I couldn't bring myself to refuse his kind offer. All right," I conceded with a quiet sigh, allowing him to help me up from the bed, his strong hand providing a comforting anchor amidst my swirling thoughts. "You will like your new room." He chirped happily as his strong arm wrapped around mine and escorted me down the hall, a hall I probably was going to see again anytime soon. It's in the king's private wing, and has a beautiful view of the grounds. "I can take over from here." 𝐊𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐬. I jumped in surprise as the king's voice suddenly sounded in the hall around us. The servants that had been scurrying by instantly stopped and bowed to their king, before a single nod from him let them be on their way. I blinked wide and eyes up at him, much like the very first time I ever saw him. He was dressed in complete black. All that was missing was the thick black cloak. My heart fluttered nervously inside my chest. His lightning blue gaze was locked on mine, his jaw hard as he came to a stop in front of us. 𝐊𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐬 let go of my arm and bowed. "Of course. I will see you in the dining hall." And then he left. Just like that, left me alone with the very male who had made my last 3 moons an emotional nightmare. I watched the large general walk away until I couldn't anymore, and forced my gaze up to the brilliant blue staring down at me. There was a small smile on his lips, one that surprised even the hope in my heart. "Let's go eat, yes?" he asked softly, his tone almost gentle as his large body loomed my smaller one. I could only nod. I half expected him to take my arm like 𝐊𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐬 had, and half expected him not to touch me at all. What I 100% did not expect was for him to reach down and entwine his long, strong fingers with mine. I gaped down at them. His palm alone was as large as a bear's, and made mine feel smaller than an elf. What if someone sees? I was finally able to gasp as he gently tugged on my hand and led me down the hall. Let them. I told you already. Most of the castle knows who you are now, and I care little if the rest sees. I didn't know how to feel at that, but my heart thumped louder in my chest anyways. I could only walk quickly beside him, dumbfounded, as he led me down the large set of marble stairs and into the room where I ate with all his generals the day before. You will always eat in here now, unless you want a private dinner, he announced just outside of the door, his warm hand like iron as it gripped gently onto mine. I was starting to feel lightheaded. Oh, okay. I stammered before he opened the door and pulled me through. All 6 of his generals were there, even 𝐿𝐷𝐿𝐬. But unlike before, they didn't bother to stop talking and laughing. And they didn't stand until Eric had pulled me around the front of the table. They paused in their conversations, all 6 eyes, before they eased to their feet. I blushed as they did that right, arm over the chest bowing like the day before. Lady Immerse. They all greeted before sitting back down and talking once again. Well, that wasn't as bad as last time. Eric's voice was a dark chuckle in my ear. They know that makes you uncomfortable, but they will bow in respect every time they see you. So be prepared. I could only nod as he gestured to the small cushioned chair behind me. That is yours now. You sit up here. With me. I cowled and stopped the heat from rising to my cheeks as I sat in the comfortable chair and let him push me into the table. 𝐿𝐷𝐿𝐬 shot me a wink, which didn't help the blush at all. Eric sat down heavily in the throne-like chair beside me, his bright eyes tired as he gazed over at the food. He frowned. You are not hungry, I stated softly as the loud voices from the end of the table filled the room. His bright gaze glanced over, his hand gently reaching up to brush against the back of mine. No, I still don't feel so well. Me either. For a while after that we were silent. Just silently eating, while I pretended not to notice how his strong fingers would occasionally brush against the back of my hand. I wasn't sure what was happening anymore, what I was supposed to think. My mind was going 1,000,000 miles an hour, and my poor heart couldn't keep up. The heavy snow is finally starting to fall, and the market has this amazing bakery I want to take you to. My lady. 𝐿𝐷𝐿𝐬 chattered happily from beside me, his mouth already filled with a fluffy pastry. The sight made me let out a little laugh. I've never been down to the castle's village before, well, when I was actually invited to. It sounded like an excellent way to spend the day, especially since the king said I didn't have to really hide anymore. You can do that tomorrow. There's a place I want to take her to today. North's statement threw me off guard and I dropped my fork to my plate in surprise. He finished off his toast like he hadn't noticed me staring over at him like a wide-eyed gaping fish. 𝐿𝐷𝐿𝐬 shifted beside me. Sure, we can wait until tomorrow. The king wanted to take me somewhere. We were actually going to spend time together. I probably did die, and this was the heavens. The gold power succeeded in its task to kill me, and now I was surrounded by a king who suddenly seemed to care. Well, are you done? Eric asked softly a few moments later, his blue eyes bright as they gazed down at me. I glanced back at my half-eaten plate and nodded. I had too many nerves raging through me to stomach anything else. He gave me a warm smile before easing the chair back and standing. I will be gone for most of the day. Find her for 𝐿𝐷𝐿𝐬 if you need me. He didn't wait for their response, and instead reached down for my hand to help ease me to my feet. They all grunted in approval. As a low little witch, a servant appeared from the back wall with 2 cloaks in hand, one much larger than the other. Once the thick, warm fabric was wrapped securely around us, his hand was once again wrapping around mine, his large body leading us away from the table and the door to the room. I frowned at the blank stone wall we were walking towards but didn't bother saying anything as he reached up and pulled the canister of one of the torches down. I watched, amazed, as a panel in the wall slid to the side. This castle and its secret tunnels, I swear. North didn't say anything as he pulled me into the dark passage, the torch gripped tightly in his hand. The tunnel was cold, damp, and narrow. The king had to practically walk sideways just to fit. I wanted to laugh at the sight, but even hunched over awkwardly, he still looked unearthly beautiful. His blue eyes glowed in the darkness. Where exactly are we going? I asked after a few minutes of walking in complete and total silence. A sacred place. Sacred. The words sounded foreign as they passed my lips, but that was only because the shifters I grew up with had very few sacred places. I didn't think I had ever been to one. Yes, it is where the great god 𝐴𝐴𝐺 would enter the mortal realm whenever he traveled down from the heavens. He said that so matter-of-factly that even a non-believer would think it were the truth. I gazed curiously up at the large wolf. 𝐖𝐴𝐺𝐼 had spoken of the wolf, Born's legends, as just that, legends. Myths. He gave no inclination about whether or not he thought them to be true. But the king made his beliefs quite obvious. There was no wonderment in his tone. He fully believed in 𝐴𝐴𝐺 in the heavens. I didn't know why I found that so admirable. It was long after that when we entered the outside world, a world covered in a crystal white snow. I breathed in the fresh, cold air. I had missed this. Missed the feeling of the mountain wind and the chill of the cold. Eric paused beside me. It's beautiful. I spoke on a sigh, my voice turning to fog in the freezing air. Snow and ice clung to the bare branches of forest trees, as light flake fell from the sky. Yes, it is. We stayed standing there a minute more, both of our gazes locked on the white, encrusted top of the mountain before the king decided it was time to keep moving. Come, we have a walk ahead of us. I followed after him obediently, my hand clutched tightly in his as he led me into the trees of the mountain. Like the first time he had dragged me deep into some part of the woods. I was having trouble keeping up, even with my hand clutched tightly in his. His legs were just so much taller than my own. 𝐊𝐴𝐺𝐸 had been walking for more than 5 minutes when he let out a sigh after helping me. Once again, gained my footing when I stumbled. Do you always walk so clumsily? He grumbled as I brushed the snow from my dress and cloak. I shot him a scowl and ignored the heat rising to my cheeks in embarrassment now. It's just hard keeping up with you. My legs aren't that long. His whole demeanor changed and he gave me an apologetic smile before stepping closer. I am sorry. I'm not used to accommodating someone so small. Small. I am not small. You're just freakishly large. My verbal rampage was cut short when his dark chuckle simmered around us and his blue eyes flashed. You are cute when you're flustered. I could only gape up at him like a blubbering fool as he suddenly bent down and kicked me straight off the floor. He started carrying me, just like that time all those moons ago when we first talked. My heart seemed to burn in my chest at the memory, at the way his strong arms held me securely to his chest. It was long before my blush was back in full force. How were the islands? I asked softly as he began walking again. His blue eyes trained ahead to avoid the rough terrain. His gaze slanted over to me. �Messio. He chuckled. And the deep. Dark sound did nothing to ease the nervous fluttering in my stomach. I will tell you if you truly want to know. But I don't think you want to hear about war matters. Not really. I shrugged and let my arm hang loosely around his neck as he stepped over a large fallen log. Can I ask you something? I was surprised at the question in his tone, but immediately nodded as he carried me further along the snowy mountain. You used to live with those 2 friends of yours, yes? He asked softly, his voice gruff as his eyes flickered over to mine. I tilted my head curiously in his direction and nodded. Do you not have a family? They are my family. I answered without hesitation. They were the only people I truly ever knew. I was sure what happened to my parents or anyone else I was ever related to. I'd never known my blood family. My earliest memories were of playing with May in the snow and avoiding the snowballs 𝐊𝐴𝐺𝐸 would throw at us. I never really wondered about my lack of parents before. Never honestly cared. I had May and her family. That was all I had ever needed. I see, he murmured thoughtfully, his blue eyes dark for once as they stayed trained ahead of us. We remained silent after that, but it was an awkward, tense quiet. For the first time since I arrived in his kingdom, I felt strangely calm, at peace. I was simply enjoying his company, enjoying being around him for the first time in a long time. It took all my willpower not to lay my head on his shoulder and close my eyes. Oh, how easy that would be, 𝐸. His voice was like a sweet song in my deaf ear as I groaned and blinked open heavy eyes. He was gently shaking me in his strong arms. Where are we? I mumbled as one of his large hands rubbed along my back. He chuckled. We are at the place. You fell asleep. I didn't want to wake you. My head felt heavy as I lifted it off his strong shoulder and stifled a yawn. I gave his amused, blue eyes a tired smile. Sorry, you are just very comfortable. I'm sure if my mind was so groggy from the little nap I would have watched what I said, but he didn't seem to mind. Don't be. I wanted to pout when he suddenly lowered me to the ground and pulled away, but I didn't feel like that would have been very appropriate. But he was so comfy. I gazed out at the scenery around us, at the large, almost silver in color, boulders I was sitting on, at the tall evergreen trees lining a solid river, and then finally at the large, completely frozen waterfall looming way above our heads. I could practically feel the power of the place thrumming beneath me. Wow. Yes, I can feel it too, Eric murmured above me, his eyes distant as he gazed out at the white landscape. This place is beautiful, but most of the mountain is anyways. I shot a smile up to him as his eyes glanced down to mine. Indeed, he agreed before lowering himself to the ground across from me, the large boulders at our back acting as perfect chairs. I used to come here quite often when I was younger. It made me feel closer to the heavens. His tone was suddenly so sad, so sorrowful that it pulled at my heart. He sounded as if he were remembering a time far better than now. But then again, he probably was. For a moment, my conversation with Turif all those moons ago flashed through my mind, the one where he alluded to the fact that the king was beyond the age of modern men. But I did not feel like now was the appropriate time to ask about it. Why did you stop? I asked softly as his bright gaze lingered on the frozen river, his thick arms crossed over his hard chest. I grew older, took on more responsibilities. I have little time to sit idly by some waterfall for hours on end. I didn't miss the hidden venom behind his words, or the hard bite in his tone. It made me squirm uneasily. Why did you bring me here? This place seemed special to him, despite his previous statements, and I was surprised he would want to share a place so precious with me. His blue eyes flashed as they flickered over to mine. I often forget who I was, who I am. But every time I come to this place, every time I'm with you, I remember. His voice was deep, low, as it washed over me and wrapped around my chest in an iron grip. I glanced over at the frozen waterfall. The ice just looked so still, so perfect. Is that a bad thing? I asked softly as I reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind nervously. We haven't held random conversations like this before, and I wasn't sure how long it would last. His lightning eyes snapped to mine, and the smile that pulled on his full lips was dazzling. He gave me a soft chuckle. No, quite the opposite. I honestly had no idea what he meant. It couldn't have been hard to forget that he was a king. People either worshipped him or cowered whenever he walked by, but I just nodded my head in agreement with whatever he said. As long as that voice of his kept talking. Tell me something. I murmured softly a few silent moments later as I cradled my knees to my chest and rested my cheek against them. His lips curled up at the corner and those blue eyes locked on mine as he leaned casually against the boulder behind him. What do you want to know? Anything. Tell me a story. Anything to keep you talking. I wanted to say, but knew better than to sound like too much of a crazy person. His smile only widened and he crossed his feet at his ankles as that bright gaze flickered in front of him. He rolled his tongue slowly, like he was deep in thought over what to say, before glancing up to the white, clouded sky. There is a story. A myth, really. My mother used to tell me when I was little. He started low, his voice warm and deep as I gazed over at him. It shouldn't be possible for someone to hold that much beauty in their face alone. About 𝐸 and his fall from the heavens. Chapter 21. Would you like to hear the story? His bright eyes flashed in amusement as I nodded quickly. I loved learning about his kind's culture and customs, and I wouldn't mind listening to that heart-lulling voice for ages. This tale is not in the book I had 𝐿𝐻𝐬 give you. Some of the smaller details were, but the majority of the story is saved for parents to pass down to their children. I could only sit silently and nod as I watched his beautiful mouth move with each word that passed his lips. 𝐸𝐻𝐬 is the base of our existence. But long ago, long before any wolf, born or shifter inhabited the world, he ruled the night from his place high in the heavens. He would often visit the mortal realm to run with the animals of his domain, but he would always have to travel back to the moon before the sun rose the next day. He lived this way for thousands of years, shining the moon's light down on the world. Eric paused, his lightning blue eyes flickering to mine. He licked his full bottom before giving me a slow-arriving smile. But those animals were little comfort. The more years that passed, the more 𝐸𝐻𝐬 realized the constant ache in his chest was loneliness. His smile soon fell and turned sad as he reached up to twirl a strand of my hair around his strong fingers. My heart skipped at the action. Sure, there were other gods, even a few goddesses who he spoke to and dined with, but none of them were ever enough to fill that empty hole inside his heart. So he would sit in his palace on the moon and gaze down in sorrow at the world below him. What did they have that he didn't? I frowned at the look that passed over his bright eyes. That sad, lonely look, like he knew and felt the exact same pain 𝐸𝐻𝐬 had over and over again. I wanted to take that look away. Take away the pain that I was almost sure he was hiding in his chest. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 said he was old. But how long has he truly been alone? He trusted his generals with his life. That was obvious. But did he ever consider them friends? Was I the only person that has ever seen any warm or kind side to him? But that side was short-lived. He continued speaking despite my inner ramble, and I forced myself to focus on the words. Then, one day, the pure, perfect soul of a girl who died before her time was reborn into a star just outside his spot on the moon. My heart stopped beating as he reached up and tucked my hair behind my ear. He was fascinated by the glowing soul, disabled by her beauty. He would sit just outside of his palace and watch her shine all night long, and then stay there during the day until she returned once the darkness fell again. He was infatuated by her, for the first time in centuries. He had felt something more than just an empty loneliness. He paused again, his blue eyes shining as his large hand reached up and brushed softly along my cheek. It took all I had in me not to press his palm to my face and bury my head there forever. His smile made butterflies erupt in my stomach. I remained silent. All stars are pure, innocent, souls reborn, but they would all talk and laugh with the others residing in the heavens whenever they chose. But not the one that piqued his attention. Oh no, no. She was quiet. She kept to herself. Occasionally she would laugh at something another had said, or would glance shyly over where the god of the night resided, but other than that, she stayed silent. It struck a chord inside of him. What could he do to gain her attention? To make her talk to him? His thumb rubbed slowly over my jaw and brushed gently along my chin before he pulled away. It caused my stomach to tug painfully. I never wanted him to stop those soft touches, to stop from talking. He would tease her constantly, give her little compliments that would always make her blush. Night after night he gave her all his attention. He stopped traveling down to the mortal world, stopped spending time with his night-time creatures. That emptiness in his chest was fading, and being replaced by the bright, shining light of his quiet little soul. This story made my heart ache. The king's voice was so soft as spoke, so caring as he told of 𝐸𝐻𝐬 and that soul. It made my own loneliness squeeze around my chest. Would he ever feel that way about me? Would he ever want me the way his god wanted that star? Eventually she started to warm up to him. Her giggles would turn into quiet laughs and her shy smiles slowly turned to bright blushes. He loved it. Loved the way she reacted to his compliments and sweet words. It wasn't long after that when she started speaking to him. Barely, and very soft, but words nonetheless. 𝐸𝐻𝐬 was ecstatic. I now understood why he liked this story so much as a child. It spoke of a slow-growing love that took time and effort, that pushed away the emptiness in an aching heart. I had no idea what type of childhood he had, but it had to be lonely. His life now had to be lonely, and I wanted to so desperately change that for him. Until he had completely and totally fallen for the shy soul. They would talk for hours and hours, night after night, until the star had realized she had fallen in love with him too. He would do everything in his power to hear that sweet laugh, to ensure she had everything her perfect little heart ever desired. His voice was so deep, so melodic, and I wrapped the thick, dark cloak tighter around me as I tried not to close my eyes in pure bliss. I could hear him talk for hours, days. 𝐴𝐸 and that soul were the very first mates of my kind. And they were happy. For a while, they were happy. I didn't miss the shift in his tone, or the way his eyes darkened as they pulled away from mine. His whole demeanor turned sorrowful. It took all I had in me not to reach over and gentle smooth away the small frown pulling at his brow. I doubted he would have appreciated that. This was such a lovely story, but I was sure that look on his face meant and 'ten well. But then the wars started. The civil wars in the skies between all gods and goddesses. No one really knew how or why they began, but many upon many suffered because of it, including the god of the night. The happiness in my heart from our little conversation was slowly fading as his face fell, and I cowed and helped my own sorrow that filled its place. It didn't sound like this would have a happy ending at all. The star had begged him not to join in on the fighting, to stay with her where they were happy and in love. But he would not listen. He denied her the one thing she wanted the most. And he left. He was not there when the wars moved too close to the moon, too close to their home. He was not there to protect her when the fighting had knocked her straight from the night sky, had thrown her completely from the heavens. Tears were pooling in my eyes. Tears I tried to hastily force down before he could see. This was starting to sound a little too much like when he left, when I had practically begged him not to go. But he did anyway. I didn't like this story anymore. It was making me unbelievably sad. I turned my head away from him so he could not see the water I was trying to shove away. But he had already noticed. His blue eyes wide, and he leaned towards me before I had a chance to wipe the water that fell on my cheek away. "Don't be sad. Little Immerse. It's just a story," he murmured softly, his eyes warm as his hand reached up and brushed an escaped tear from my cheek. I gave him a water smile. "It's a sad story," I mumbled before resting my chin on my knees. His beautiful face pulled into a small frown. "I don't have to finish, if you don't want me to." "And no, I do. I do. Please continue." My tears wouldn't be the thing to ruin this time between us, to keep that beautiful voice of his from talking. His frown pulled into a small smile. "Are you sure?" he asked softly as he pulled away from me again with his blue eyes dark against the white snow around us. I nodded and rested my cheek back on my knees, my gaze blinking pleadingly up at him. "Never stop talking." "All right." The star was knocked from her place by his side and tossed into the mortal realm below. 𝐻𝐸 wasn't aware at any of this at first. He was too busy fighting in a war he had no part in. Gee, didn't that sound familiar? But when he came back to his palace on the moon, ready to embrace his little soul tightly in his arms and never let her go, she was gone. He was confused, then furious when he noticed the carnage of his palace, of their home. He started rampaging through what was left of the skies, demanding that any god or goddess he could get his hands on tell him what had happened. But no one truly knew until they looked out into the night. It had been hundreds upon hundreds of stars that had been knocked from the heavens, that had been thrown to the world below like pieces of lightweight garbage. He was enraged, much like the furious god in the story. 𝐻𝐸's eyes started to glow with a simpering angry, as if he too could feel the pain and loss of his gods. He tore apart what he could get his hands on, convinced it was the other immortal's fault that he lost his precious soul, the one good, pure thing he had ever truly known. She was gone, and it wasn't long before he realized it was his fault. If he had just stayed behind like she asked him to, like she begged him to, then she would be safe and sound wrapped in his arms. The king was so passionate when he talked, so into the story and the emotions running through it. I was so enraptured by his talking that I could almost see the story play out in my head. And it was heartbreaking. He cast himself from heaven voluntarily, left his place on the moon and his title as an all-powerful god behind to fall to the mortal world. He was determined to find her, to beg for her forgiveness and keep her safe in the mortal realm where no ridiculous civil war would ever take her again. His voice slowly trailed off. His eyes sad as he gazed over at me with a small smile. My heart thumped painfully. He never found her. Did he? My voice was a breathless whisper as the air turned to fog around me. He gave a small shake of his head. No, he didn't. But the story says that he has never stopped searching. That even now, he roams the world looking for her in the form of the one creature he always revered the most. A wolf. And that's where my kind came in. He said the last part with such a bright smile that it made the painful ache in my chest ease some. They say the very first wolf born was originally born a wolf, and a dear companion of 𝐸𝐴𝐺𝐻. The great god apparently granted him the ability to shift into the two-legged creatures that roamed the civilized portions of the world when the wolf fell in love with a human girl from a distant land. This was definitely not in the book 𝐿 had given me. It was because of the first wolf shifter that 𝐸𝐴𝐺𝐻 created mates. He saw the love the wolf had held in his heart, and desperately missed the love he shared with his soul. He never wanted one of his creations to ever feel the loneliness he had, so he molded souls together before they were born to ensure they would never be truly alone. They would always find their mate, even if it took a while. His blue eyes snapped up and locked with mine. The smile pulling on his lips sent my heart into overdrive. Mates. He believed that 𝐸𝐴𝐺𝐻 paired each and every single mate that he paired us. I could see it in his eyes. His blind faith in some moon god that I wasn't even sure existed. That wolf became the very first Northern king. The human part of him, the one gifted by 𝐸𝐴𝐺𝐻, was a piece of the god's soul. A piece that is said to be passed down my line. Is it? I asked softly as his blue eyes flashed. 𝐿 had said something about a part of the god's soul living in Eric, and even that little history book did as well. If what the general had said about the king's power was true, I didn't doubt he could have part of a god's soul. North's lips pulled into a small smile. Want to see something? I nodded eagerly and leaned away from my knees as the king leaned forward, his palm raising in the air between us. I watched in awe as the king whispered something before his blue eyes began to glow. Then there was a flash of light before a little blue tornado started spiraling in his hand. My eyes widened at the sight, and I gasped as the little storm spun with complete control in his large palm. Even if a part of his soul is not inside of me, his voice was deep, hoarse even as it filled my eardrums, his blue eyes still glowing in unnatural light. His power is... There was another flash of light, and then the tornado in his hand disappeared. Oh my God. That's how you were able to appear on the ship. I exclaimed excitedly, and couldn't help but clap my hands as his eyes faded back to their regular blue. He gave me a small smile as his heavy body slumped back against the boulder. Yes, that is how I am able to do a lot. Then his eyes slowly turned hard, the light from before leaving. I was named after him, destined to carry on his title in the mortal plane. I tilted my head curiously to the side and gazed over at his drooped head. He suddenly seemed incredibly tired. I hoped that little magic trick didn't sap him of all the energy he had been sleeping constantly for. Eric isn't anywhere close to 𝐸𝐴𝐺𝐻. His eyes flickered up to me, and their lightning blue flashed in amusement before glancing out at the frozen river. Eric was the name of the first wolf, shifter, the one 𝐸𝐴𝐺𝐻 had turned. I told you from the start that wasn't my real name. My eyes wide at his words. Oh Lord, oh Lord, oh Lord. He was right. I totally forgot about that. Your real name is 𝐸𝐴𝐺𝐻. Yes, whoa. Talk about living up to a name. It was my father's, and my grandfather's, who was said to be the first son of Eric, but he died long before I was ever born. We take our bloodline very seriously. Immerse. I could tell. What was the star's name? I asked softly as he leaned his head back against the large rock and gazed up at the cloudy Snow falling sky. He paused, his eyes blinking slowly up at the white flakes. The hesitancy made me frown. I don't remember. Chapter 22 here. Tribes. 𝐿𝐲𝐻𝐬 mumbled around a mouthful of food and shoved even more pastries into my hands. Who would have thought the king of the North's second in command had such a sweet tooth? 𝐿𝐲𝐻𝐬. I told you half an hour ago in full. If I eat any more, my stomach will explode. He rolled his eyes and stuffed what looked like another cookie into his mouth. More for me then. The wolf, borns passing by, and even those in the shops, gave us funny looks, but they were more directed at me than at the mouth, filled piggy general. They could tell I washed one of them, that I was an underling, as I heard someone whisper in a hushed voice before rushing off. 𝐿𝐲𝐻𝐬 told me to just ignore them, but having most of an entire species' attention on you is hard. News of you is spreading. He spoke on a more solemn note a moment later, his brown eyes hard as he scanned the crowd around us. I figured they would be suspicious of an underling. No, it's not that. They know you are the king's mate. They're curious about you. They were curious about me. Well, that didn't help ease the anxiety raging through me. I shuffled uneasily beside him and tried not to make it obvious that I was cowering into his side. The king had to go to a meeting with the rest of his generals and �K𝐿 come to town with us, but he made sure 𝐿𝐲𝐻𝐬 knew not to leave my side before. The serious, angered look in his bright blue gaze had frightened me. He seemed truly worried about something, like he honestly feared someone was after me. Let's head back. It's getting late. 𝐿𝐲𝐻𝐬 announced a moment later once all his pastries were gone. I nodded my head almost eagerly and let him take my arm to escort me up the snowy steps of the castle. North and I had spent the majority of the day before together, and were really only separated when he dropped me off at my room, the one just a few doors away from his. It had been so surreal I feared that it was just a dream. We had even ate breakfast together in the morning, just the two of us in this private little study at the end of the hall. It had been so nice and peaceful that I never wanted it to end. But 𝐿𝐲𝐻𝐬 wanted to take me to the town, and the king had things to do. I wasn't sure what to call him anymore. Adranus was his real name, but I didn't feel comfortable calling him that. He told me just to stick with Eric, but that didn't seem personal at all anymore. North and the king would just have to do until I figured out the mess inside my head. Will you be fine getting back to your room from here? The king just sent for me, said it was important. 𝐿𝐲𝐻𝐬 suddenly announced the minute we stepped through the main entrance of castle. I blinked up at his brown eyes as they stared down at me in apology, and nodded. I didn't bother asking the series of questions their comments brought to my mind anymore. I only ended up even more confused. I knew what powers the king held. I'm sure conversing with his generals without being anywhere near each other was only a small part of it. Thank you. He raised the back of my hand to his lips and pressed a soft, quick kiss there before letting go and turning on his heels. I let out a sigh and shook my head as he walked away. I would never get used to those wolves. Ever since the king had moved me into his wing, I had been allowed to wander around by myself once in a while. I was alone often, but the few times I tried to enjoy them. I knew there was something special about you. That slipper, slimy voice from the man the king seemed desperate to get rid of caused my steps to falter half, way up the stairs. I gripped tightly onto the railing as I raised my eyes to the pale yellow of his. Liberius. Who would have thought that our great king had a mate? He was leaning almost casually against the railing at the top of the stairs, his thin arms crossed over his equally thin chest through the thick robes he was wearing. I tried to discreetly edge around the other side of the staircase, but I'm sure those beady eyes noticed. There's no need to fear me, child. I am not the enemy. Yeah, right. Then who is? I practically demanded as I hurried up the rest of the stairs. I need to be level with the creepy man, not below him. If I had to defend myself, it was much better that way. Those who wish the king harm, of course, and I only care about what is best for him. His pale eyes flashed in the dim lighting of the stairwell, a malicious look crossing his gaze. I have a feeling you and I have very different ideas about what is best for him. I forced my voice to be strong, to not show any fear or weakness to the serpent-like man sneering over at me. I would never give him that satisfaction. Yes, he said on an eerie chuckle. It sent a shiver of unease down my spine. That power of yours is extraordinary. I thought I saw a shimmer of gold in your soul. You can do great things with a gift like that. I kept my mouth shut at that. He didn't need to know that using the gold, power came at a cost, or at least when I used it on the king. None of this was his concern anyway, but I knew North said he was greedy and power-hungry. The man was a seer, and I feared the souls of the lost would tell him of a way to harness the gold, power for himself. Men like him should never hold any kind of magic at their disposal. You have a very powerful soul. My dear, what a great match for the king you are. Liberius took a step closer to me, his eyes aglow in an excited, inhuman delight. I stepped away from him as waves upon waves of unease washed over me. And a very old soul. Just imagine all you could do with a power such as that. The seer took another step towards me, when I matched with a backward step of my own. Panic began to rise in my chest. What was he doing? What was this conversation trying to accomplish? I feared the look in his eyes, and the dark, excited expression on his face. My breathing turned ragged in my chest. Stay away from me. I was finally able to snap at him, even though my voice came out shakier than I had hoped. I've seen that power before. He continued, like I had never spoken at all. I took another hurried step away from him. So bright, so unique the way it fled your body in such a bright glow. Stop. I finally shouted at him, and to my utter surprise he actually did. But when his pale, yellow eyes suddenly widened in complete terror, I knew it was me he was staring at. Before I could turn and look for the source of his sudden fear, the creepy advisor let out an inhuman hiss and stumbled backwards. I knew it. He snarled at me, his eyes still wide in fear before he turned on his heels and practically ran away. The panic in my chest slowly faded as a confused. How odd. I turned slowly around, afraid of what I was going to see hiding over my shoulder that made 𝐊𝐲𝐬𝐧 so easily, but there was nothing. Just an empty stair, well leading to an even emptier hall. What in the world just happened, damn? I do not want you wandering the castle alone anymore, North practically growled as we sat at the head of the dining table a few hours later, his blue eyes murderous as I told him about mine and his advisor's little encounter. He somehow knew I had a run-in with the creepy man, something about sensing my panic, or whatever, but he didn't know what words had been exchanged. I let out a small, disgruntled sigh. I had just started gaining some much-needed freedom, only for one ridiculous incident to take it away. But honestly, with that creep wandering freely around, I didn't plan on going anywhere by myself anytime soon. You should have dealt with him before she ever arrived. Tariff's gruff voice growled from our right, and my eyes widened at the accusation in his tone. Turf questioning the king's motives was not normal, and it didn't please North in the slightest. He shot his third-in-command a scowl so hard it shook even me, but Turf only grit his jaw and cast this golden gaze at me, like he actually wanted me to say something for once. I narrowed my eyes at him. Oh, now he wants me to save his hide. Figures. It's all right. It's all right. North. Really? He just frightened me a little. A little is still too much. When I am not with you, I need one of the generals to be. At least until I have handled the situation permanently. I didn't bother arguing, and not because I knew it was a lost battle. I didn't want to be alone where the seer and I could have any more of those lovely interactions, even if the man had seemed terrified of my shadow. The rest of the evening went by relatively fast. Though I'm sure that was only because the king decided he would spend the rest of it with me. He was even teaching me how to play chess properly. You really are horrible at this, he grumbled halfway through a game I thought I was doing very well in. I scowled when he suddenly knocked my king over with a castle I hadn't seen. I simpered down in my seat angrily. His dark chuckle shook around the large room we were sitting in and wrapped around me like a warm cloak. My stomach fluttered at the sound. Do not be upset. Little Immerse. I will let you win next time. That's not the point. I grumbled even though my heart fluttered at his words. He would just make little comments like that made me question everything I knew about him. And not in a bad way. I still think you and 𝐿𝐲 are cheating. He laughed again as he reset the board, his strong fingers moving smoothly as they wandered across the board. Perhaps we are. I shot him a scowl which he just rolled his eyes at before leaning his heavy body back in his large cushioned chair. His blue eyes flashed as bright as crystals before a slow smile pulled across his lips. You have adapted to living here quite well. 𝐿𝐲 feared it would be too much for you. There was a hint of pride in his tone, one I didn't necessarily feel myself. I let my gaze fall to the chessboard as my fingers twirled a pawn between them. It's been 3 months since I arrived. I'd had time. An uneasy tension fell over the room as his blue gaze narrowed until he was staring holes into the top of my head. Then he sighed and was leaning across the small table between us to grab my hand. I am sorry for causing you pain. He started softly, his deep voice gruff as he slowly smoothed out my palm and let his strong fingers trace over its lines. That one simple touch sent my heart haywire. But I will not apologize for keeping you away from everything, from me. I believed it to be the best option to ensure your safety, at the time. I screwed that up anyway. I mumbled as he lifted my hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to the skin of my wrist. My heart fluttered at the action. His lips pulled into a small smile, one that didn't tease the butterflies in my stomach at all. Yes and no. I was planning on keeping you closed before I left for the islands when you got sick. But things happen. Things happen. Yes, they do. I have lived in isolation my whole life. I often forget that others are not as used to it as I am. His voice was suddenly a lot more somber than before, like back at that sacred frozen river. For a moment, I saw the lonely man resting just beneath his hard surface, but then he blinked and it was gone. You have your generals. They would do anything for you. They were loyal, faithful men, all of which would die for their king if he asked. His eyes stayed locked on the hand he held in his callous thumb rubbing over my tender palm. I am with them only sometimes, and I would not deprive them of their own lives just to keep me occupied. That one statement sounded so much like my own inner thoughts that it actually hurt. My voice seemed heavy in my throat as I reached over to our joined hands with my other and cupped his much large one between them. His blue eyes flickered to mine briefly before back down. It is easy to push everyone away when you have become so used to being alone. His blue eyes flashed before he turned his hand palm up to catch one of mine. Yes, it is. I could only stare as he gripped my hand tightly and raised it to his lip, the warmth of his kiss brushing softly across the back. I called and stopped the heat from flaring to my cheeks. But I do not feel that emptiness when I am with you. My heart stuttered at his words, and my eyes shot to his as my breath left on a startled gasp. Well, that I did not expect. When you are with me, I forget. And remember, everything. You are dangerous, my lady. He kissed the back of my hand again, his blue eyes hidden behind closed eyelids. I felt like all he ever did was speak in riddles, even though he knew I didn't understand. But maybe he intended it to be that way. Somehow, 𝐿𝐲𝐻. I still found the cryptic words endearing, although I was sure why. I don't understand. I mumbled as he lowered my hand to the chessboard once again. His dark chuckle filled the silence in the air. No. Perhaps that is for the best. His words only made me frown. How in the world is my not understanding for the best? It only made my confusion and curiosity skyrocket. It is getting late, he announced before I could voice my distaste. I wanted to roll my eyes at the subject change as he stood to his feet and rolled his strong shoulders, but I had a feeling he wouldn't appreciate that very well. I will walk you to your room. It wasn't a question, more like announcement that I didn't have a say in. But I wasn't going to complain. Spending time with him was quickly becoming one of my favorite pastimes, even if he did only speak in riddles. I placed my hand in his outstretched one and let him ease me to my feet. My blush was inevitable as he entwined our fingers and ushered me gently towards the hall. The little sitting room we had been spending most of the night in was in his private wing, and was a relatively short walk from my room. I held in my frown when we stopped just outside the door. There was so much more I wanted to know about him. wanted to ask him, but I knew he probably wouldn't tell me. What were his parents like? What was he like as a child? Was that lonely look in his bright eyes always there, or did something happen to cause it? 1,000 thoughts swirled through my head, thoughts I knew better than to ask him about. I'm afraid. I'm not as healed as I would like to believe. My eyes shot to his and widened at the sleep-deprived look passing over his handsome face. My heart thumped when his body leaned heavily against the wall beside me, a small smile pulling at his lips. You should rest. His hand slowly reached into the air, the rough fingers just barely playing with the end of my hair as bright blue eyes glowed in the dimly lit hallway. I will. Once I know you are safely in your room for the night. The look passing over his entrancing gaze was not one that sent pleasant feelings down my spine. Do you truly fear that 𝐿𝐲 so much? I am afraid of nothing. He believed the words. I could see it in his eyes, even though that didn't mean they were true. Everyone feared something, whether it be a person or a lonely life. There was always one fear, but I didn't necessarily want to know his. But I do fear what he is planning, and now he knows of your power. Nothing good can come of that. What do you think he will do? My voice came out a lot quieter than I would have liked, a lot more frightened than I had hoped. I was almost positive I could take 𝐊𝐲𝐵 in a physical struggle. But if magic were involved, well, which? Well, a soul interpreter was a lot more powerful than I. Nothing. I will not allow him to. Do not let your mind spend too much time worrying over this. I will deal with the seer. Chapter 23. There was no sign of the creepy 𝐊𝐵 for the next few days, but it was like I saw him much before either. Still, I worried about our next little encounter, even though one of the generals was almost glued to my side every time I left the king's wing. 𝐿𝐷r was by far the funniest of them all. All right, my lady. So since I'm on official babysitting duty, why don't we do something fun? He exclaimed loudly almost a week later, his dark eyes flashing in excitement as he practically bounced down the large hallway. My eyes wide as I watched him. He had the most energy I had ever seen a single person alone. Just watching him was exhausting. And now that Finn's off with the king, we can do whatever we want. No babysitter for me. His always amused voice sang as we rounded a corner. I couldn't help the laughter that bubbled from my lips at the sight of him. He was yet another of the king's generals who could make anyone laugh simply by talking with. What exactly do you find fun? I had a sickening feeling it wasn't anything good, or considered good in the king's eyes. If he had one of his generals basically mother the other, it had to be for a good reason. Oh, a lot of things. Don't you worry about that, he said dismissively over his broad shoulder as we reached the grand marble staircase. I shook my head with a laugh. He reminded me of an overgrown kid, or a larger version of a happy 𝐿𝐲𝐵. Are you coming, my lady? 𝐿𝐷r called half, way down the large marble stairs. I felt an embarrassed blush heat my cheeks before I nodded and hurried quickly down the steps. Okay. So breakfast first and then fun things. He was already heading for the dining hall where I now ate with the rest of them before I could respond. Sure. Answering was pointless. He seemed like he knew exactly what we were going to do regardless of whether or not I wanted to. But it was actually pretty funny. He was more excited about his recent freedom than I did about living in the king's wing. Breakfast was relatively uneventful. Besides the 𝐿𝐷r, the other generals were away with the king. They seemed to do that a lot, go off without much warning and disappear for hours. I didn't bother asking why anymore. I knew no one would answer. 𝐿𝐷r and I had just finished eating and were about to grab our cloaks for an outdoor adventure, as the general had called it, when the banging started. Loud, consistent banging that turned into the sound of 2 large doors being thrashed open. Before we were both hurrying for the dining hall's door. Immerse. My name rang as loud as the town's bell throughout the main foyer of the castle, passing from the lips of my previous guardian. My eyes widened in surprise. 𝐿𝐲, what are you doing here? The furious town leader was storming into the foyer with an icy look in his dark eyes. A look I've only seen a few times before, and he was heading straight for me. I didn't like the determined, angry look plastered on his face, and I couldn't help but take a few steps away from him. He was faster though and had a tight grip on my arm before 𝐿DR and I had any time to process what was happening. "We are leaving. Right now. What's going on?" I practically gasped as he tugged on my arm and forced me towards the entrance of the door. 𝐿DR growled behind us. "You can't be here. Immerse. We need to go. Let go, let go. Before the king makes you." 𝐿DR was suddenly blocking our departure. His voice a dark growl as his always amused eyes looked murderously serious for once. They glared down at the man in front of me. I was beyond confused. 𝐿DR paused. He didn't even seem frightened as he stood tall in front of the large general, his grip so tight and hurt. "No, I'm not afraid of your king," he snapped, his fingers like iron as they dug into my skin. I flinched at the action, and 𝐿DR's eyes snapped over to me. His gaze narrowed, and a vicious snarl pulled from his lips. "You should be. You pathetic excuse of an underling, that's enough." 𝐿DR. I shouldn't have been surprised at the king's deep, hypnotic voice sounding from the top of the stairs. He always seemed to know when something was wrong in his castle, but I was surprised at the odd, tense, calm behind his tone. "That's not how we speak to guests." I doubted he saw 𝐸𝐸 as a guest. I knew the rumors about the king were just that. Rumors, but that didn't mean they didn't stem from somewhere. North was not one known for mercy to those who trespass on his territory. And that is not how we hold our females. His voice was suddenly in my ear, the dark growl sending chills down my spine as the heat of his body pressed against my back. I gasped. He was ridiculously fast. 𝐿's grip on my arm loosened. "I do not want any trouble. Just let me take Immerse and we will be on our way." His voice was low, calm, as his dark eyes glanced between the king and the large, angry general fuming behind him. I felt my stomach drop. I had just started growing closer to him. He just started opening up to me. I didn't want to leave and jeopardize all of that now. Besides, I didn't understand the urgency behind the town leader's eyes or the worry written all over his face. He knew the king and I were mates, even if he feared they would hurt me. He should have realized that the king wouldn't allow that. And it's been months since I've been here, months. 𝐻S never once came up to the mountain before then, or sent any kind of letter. One that I was aware of at least. I'm afraid that's impossible. The panic in my chest eased some as North's strong hand reached up and gripped gently onto my upper arm, the same one 𝐿𝐸 still clung to. This is as much her home now as it is mine. My chest tightened at his words, and I glanced over my shoulder to look into his blue eyes, but they were staring down at the man still gripping tightly onto me. "I am her guardian," 𝐿 growled, the bright, glowing eyes of his shifter beginning to shine through. I gulped as I felt talons begin to scrape against my skin. I've never seen him lose control like this. It was rather frightening. "If I do not want her here, then she leaves." North shifted behind me, a growl slowly rising in his strong chest as his hand left my arm to wrap slowly around my waist. "Yes, you are the one I gave her back to under the mountain. That was my mistake, one I won't be making again." His arm around my waist tightened, his large body bending as if he were preparing to jump over me and attack 𝐿 if need be. I gulped. What in the world was going on? "She is my charge," he snarled, his fangs flashing as his eyes changed into that of his cat's, the talons in his fingers growing. I pressed myself further back into the safety of the king. "She is my mate, and you've kept her from me," North growled, but then his arm was twisting me so quickly and smoothly out of 𝐿's grip, and didn't even have time to blink. My town leader snarled as North stood like a giant, furious brick wall between us. "It's my job." My eyes wide at 𝐿's answer, my heart hammering in my chest as I stepped away from the two fuming shifter males. It was his job keeping me from the king. When was he even doing that? It was the king who told me I couldn't be with him the first few times. This was all making my head spin. 𝐿𝐷R. Escort our guest to the border. I don't want to see him or his kind anywhere near the top of the mountain again. "With pleasure, my lord," the general growled, his dark eyes glowing in what looked like pure hatred as his large hand latched tightly onto 𝐿𝐻𝐻𝐻's shoulder. His eyes snapped to mine from behind the king. The elders never told you everything. Immerse. And he never will either. I could feel the color drain from my face as 𝐊𝐲𝐷 escorted 𝐿𝐻𝐻𝐬 from the castle. A devious smirk on his amused lips as 𝐊𝐻𝐻𝐬 glared up at him. That one statement pulled at my stomach a sickening way. I always knew the elders hid things from everyone. And I knew the king and his generals were hiding from me as well. But hearing it out loud, knowing that I would probably never know what was truly going on, was almost maddening. Do not let what the underling says upset you. Immerse. The king spoke softly without bothering to turn around, his bright blue eyes locked on the struggling duo leading the castle. Something inside me bristled slightly. I am an underling too. North. He turned slowly, his eyes hard as they gazed over at me. My stomach flipped at the sudden attention. You are my mate. That makes you more important than anyone on or beneath the mountain. I glanced away from those soul-sucking eyes and ran a shaky hand through my hair. 𝐊𝐻𝐻𝐬 had almost seemed like he lost his mind, like it was his life from the king. And North. I didn't even know about him. I sighed and shook my head before turning towards the stairs. I have a headache. I'm going to go lay down for a while. I called softly behind me, whose eyes I could feel on my retreating figure as I climbed the steps. I had so much to think about, so much to work through, and I already felt like splitting my head in half with an axe. Immerse. His deep voice stopped me way up the stairs. The uncertainty in it caused my steps to falter. I will check on you later. I was not in the mood to speak with him just then, or with anyone for that matter. And bang. The loud noise of something heavy falling to the ground just down the hall had me jumping in surprise. I had been staring out the window for what seemed like hours. My mind focused on the thin layer of snow just brushing across the tops of the village. The loud crash interrupted the silence, and I had jumped to my feet and hurried for the door, my eyes wide in alarm. It had only been a few hours since 𝐊𝐻𝐻𝐬 had come barging into the castle, and I spent them locked in my room thinking of everything and nothing. I only ended up more confused than ever. I knew I needed to ask North about what had happened, about why 𝐊𝐻𝐻𝐬 had been so adamant on getting me away from him, but I knew the king wouldn't tell me anything. He was never forthcoming about any sort of information, but I couldn't think about that now. I hurried to my door and slipped easily out into the large hallway, only for my steps to falter. The king was lying heavily on his side against the cold wooden floor, his deep voice a disgruntled growl as he tried to hold himself off the ground. What happened? I gasped before hurrying to his side, my hands practically shaking as I bent down to try and help. Dazed, blue eyes shot to mine, and a slow, brilliant smile pulled at his lips. My beautiful Immerse. That dark lull in his voice tugged almost viciously at my heart, and my movement stopped as my gaze locked with his. Beautiful 𝐻𝐻𝐬 never said anything like that to me before. I shook my head when his eyes started to droop, and the smile faded, like he was too tired to maintain any facial expressions. Come on. I muttered and gripped tightly onto his large upper arm with both my hands. You need to go lie down. Trying to pull him to his feet was absolutely useless. He was twice, if not 3 times my size, and seemed to weigh a ton. But I was going to just let him fall asleep in the middle of the hallway, and he didn't seem to be moving himself anytime soon. I am so very tired. Immerse. His voice was almost a slur once I finally got him to lean back against the wall so he was no longer lying on the ground. I can see that. I don't think you will heal as fast as you have everyone believe. I grumbled as he leaned back against the wall with a heavy sigh. He let out a dark chuckle. We do. My body is just not used to using all that power that I had to. His eyelids started to droop, his head lolling to the side. My eyes wide in alarm. There was no way I could possibly let him fall asleep out here. My lady, what happened? My head snapped up when 𝐊𝐻𝐻𝐬's voice suddenly filled the dark hall of the king's wing. I let out a relieved sigh. I think he fell. Help me get him to his rooms, I was asking, and 𝐊𝐢𝐻's second-in-command jumped straight into action. I tried to grab a hold of the barely conscious king's thick arm, but it was no use. Compared to him, I had no strength in my entire body. I got him. 𝐿𝐢𝐳𝐼𝐻 growled as he crouched on 𝐊𝐻's other side, his bulging arm straining as he got the king's arm around his neck and hauled him to his feet. Are you meh? At me. Immerse. North mumbled half, way down the hall. I had been following quietly just a few steps behind 𝐿𝐢𝐳𝐼𝐻, but my head snapped up at the question. He was half using 𝐿𝐢𝐳𝐼𝐻 to drag him, and half using the wall to support his heavy weight as we walked down the hall. Even though I couldn't see his blue eyes, I knew what little of his attention he was able to focus was on me. Was I mad at him? At that moment, I only wanted to get him safely in his bed where he could sleep off whatever just happened. But in general, perhaps I was a little irritated. I mean, what exactly had happened with 𝐿𝐢𝐻? What won't he tell me, or ever tell me for that matter? And he threw my previous guardian pretty much off the mountain. I never got a chance to talk to him, to ask what he meant, or see if he and 𝐿𝐲 were doing all right. I had way too many thoughts and emotions spinning through my head to point a single one. No, I'm not. I answered, if only to help ease his mind. He obviously was healed as well as he tried to make anyone believe. He needed to rest, not worry about whether I was mad at him. He didn't say anything else as 𝐿𝐢𝐳𝐼𝐻 finally eased him into his open room. A few loud, vicious grunts came from his general as he hauled the large king across the room. I stood awkwardly just inside of the large door, my eyes following north the entire time. I was worried. Incredibly so. He was only going to push himself more and more in for rest. He was never going to allow himself to fully heal. You need to sleep, 𝐿𝐢𝐳𝐼𝐻 growled once he finally helped the king onto his bed. Fuck off. My eyes widened as those two words growled past his lips, but the general didn't seem to mind. In fact, he let out a short laugh. Gladly, he turned from north without another word and headed straight for the door, leaving the king fully dressed and tossed on top of his covers. Come, my lady. He needs to rest, she stays. 𝐊𝐻's voice snarled from across the room. His back still turned to us as my eyes snapped over to his. 𝐿𝐢𝐳𝐼𝐻's stare narrowed. You need to sleep, and you will be too distracted by her if she stays. Immerse is staying. There was no room for argument in his tone as he finally managed to roll over onto his back, his blue eyes blinking towards the ceiling in a daze. The general let out a loud sigh. Very well, but he must rest. He spoke directly to me this time. His gaze narrowed as he blinked down at me in a clear order. My lady. He waited until I gave him a slow nod, his dark eyes almost hard as he stared down at me. I will check on him tomorrow. He left shortly after that, but the warning in his voice was clear. Despite how close I believed us to be, he didn't want me preventing his king from getting the rest he desperately needed. Come here. 𝐊𝐻's dark voice snarled once the door closed behind me. My face pulled into a scowl, but I walked slowly over to the side of the bed anyway. You should really sleep. North, I murmured once my fingertips could just brush along the tops of the blanket at his side. Don't call me that. He grumbled as his heavy arm reached up and draped over his handsome face. My lips pulled into a frown as I stood awkwardly by his side. I don't know what to call you, I admitted softly as I watched the rather uneven rise and fall of his chest. My name. I bit my lip at his response, at how easy he made it seem. It was more than 5 months ago where he refused to give me even a hint about his true name, and now he wants me to actually call him by it. You do not wish for people to know. I do not care about that anymore. Those things do not matter. I ran my tongue along my bottom lip, my hands fumbling together in front of me. I was sure what to do, what he wanted me to do. Just stand there awkwardly until he fell asleep. You are the only thing that matters now. Immerse. My heart faltered in its beats, the blood draining from my face as my breathing hardened. I was the only thing that mattered. I wanted to take that in a sense that showed his true feelings for me. I truly did. But that part of me kept locked inside a solitary castle for 3 months, felt that he didn't have a choice in the matter. I was his mate. And HES made it quite obvious that was important, whether or not he wanted it that way. I was sure. And I will sleep. Just stay with me, he grumbled before dropping his arm back to his side, his voice trailing off as his bright eyes officially closed. There was heat burning my cheeks, even though I was sure why. So I continued to stand awkwardly at the side of the bed. I would stay until he fell asleep, if that made him feel better. Perhaps I should pull up a chair. The gruff sigh that passed his lips surprised me, and my eyes snapped up from the floor. Beside me. Lay beside me. Immerse. The heat bruising my cheeks burned even hotter as his large hand reached out and grasped onto my wrist. Lay beside him. He wanted me to lie beside him, oh my. Please. I'm not sure why, but that one simple word had me slowly complying. I ignored the voice in my head telling me how inappropriate it was, or that I should just go back to my room and my own bed, but I was sliding slowly beside him before I could convince myself not to. I blinked up to the ceiling high above the 4-poster bed we were lying on, his large hands still wrapped gently around my wrist. My heart was beating too erratically for my eyes to close and enjoy this moment. A rare moment that would probably never happen again. This is where you belong. Immerse.